And if you think about learning outside of the classroom, like when you pick things up, um, whether you're an adult or a kid, the way you pick things up is by watching somebody, trying it with them, and then you maybe go experiment on your own somewhere else. And so the closer I think we can get to that authentic, natural way that we typically learn outside of an educational space, uh, the more likely we are to help students engage.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another SPARC cast. As a reminder, SPARC for us stands for Share, Practice, Align, Reflect, Connect. So let's spark something new today. I'm Josh, and this is Sheridan. We work in the CET, and we're going to continue our active learning showcase today. So Sheridan, who do we have?
Thanks, Josh. We're excited and honored to have Charles Fournier join us today. Charles brings a wealth of experience to education and podcasting. He's an award-winning podcaster, teacher, and journalist. He's a creator of and producer of Those Who Can't Teach Anymore, and a producer of the Historian's Table. Charles spent 12 years teaching high school English and 4 years teaching in the college level. He is here with us teaching English and podcasting and just making Laramie County Community College such a dynamic place. Thank you so much for joining us today, Charles.
All right.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So because we're talking about active learning, this is our little showcase today. And I think sometimes when you think English, you don't think that that's an active environment. I think that's something that, we just don't think about. So as an English teacher, can you start us off with just talking about what you think of when you think of active learning and how often it happens in your classroom?
Well, active learning, I feel like is engaged or authentic learning. I think it's something that whatever you're doing in the classroom is hopefully applicable outside of the classroom. And a lot of times when you're doing things outside of the classroom that are, English, composition, whatever related, it's going to be active. You're going to be doing it in practice. And so my thought was, and this has been my whole teaching career, that I always wanted to make sure that what I did in class was relevant outside of the class. When I was teaching high school, like nobody really cares if you could quote Shakespeare, like it's cool to party. But we want to know, like, how can we make some of these like life experiences applicable outside? Like, how do you pull the emotion from it? And so in my classroom, I try really hard to make sure that we have some sort of engagement, interaction every single class. Me just sitting and talking to folks stresses me out, stresses the students out. It's boring. And so a lot of my lecture, as close as I get to lecture, it's all student informed, or I'm taking notes on what they're saying. And so I say, hey, what do you guys know about this? And then they're engaging or they're talking with each other. And we're trying to build all of this together. And so it's really based on their conversation, because if I can connect with what they already know, then that's going to help me out. And when I can, I really try to get out of the class and wander. I think when we think of analysis, especially within like rhetorical analysis of any kind, we sometimes limit it to just text. And in like the nerdy English world, we argue that everything's text because you can read, analyze anything. So, and so as a teacher, and this is kind of maybe jumping ahead, but how I got into podcasting and all these other things is that I wanted to make sure whatever I was doing was authentic and not like creepy treehouse authentic, where it's like, hey kids, I'm bringing in games. Like that always feels really weird. I want to make sure that feels like, no, this is like what the professionals do. And so let's do our best to try to get to that point. And so for me, the authenticity is, and I guess the active learning aspect of it is saying, no, like this actually directly applies to whatever you want to do outside of this classroom. Hopefully that covers it.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about since you brought up what I got to come to your class and witness, just a little bit. What if I were to describe it, what I saw, because they were going to go and write their own paper, right? So it was almost like you were doing, I guess active, I'm trying to find a different word, but like active instructions of, and like this practice round with them. Is that kind of a decent way to describe it?
Yeah. And I think a lot of, I don't know, I'm stealing this from other folks, but like I like the workshop model of classroom. And I think you see that in even like writing programs or trade programs where it's, you're like, hey, this is how you do it. All right, you see that? Cool. All right, now let's all do this together. Hey, look, see how that's how you do it. And then go try it yourself. So it's like the I do, we do, you do model. And I feel like that always sounds cheesy in like pedagogy language, but I do really like the idea of like I worked industrial ironwork and I was in trade work. And if I just get thrown out there, which I did, like I got thrown out there to do a couple jobs, and I screwed up right away, and I ruined some really expensive metal. And so it was nice when like I had my foreman come out, show me, and say, "All right, do it in front of me." And he's like, "Okay, now you can go off and do whatever." And so I think that as human beings, we do that learning quite a bit. And if you think about learning outside of the classroom, like when you pick things up, um, whether you're an adult or a kid, the way you pick things up is by watching somebody, trying it with them, and then you maybe go experiment on your own somewhere else. And so the closer I think we can get to that authentic, natural way that we typically learn outside of an educational space, uh, the more likely we are to help students engage. So when I show them, it's hopefully like, okay, you kind of can see what we're doing. And then when we go together, they can see maybe where there's some pitfalls and what they thought I was doing versus what I was really doing. And I can hopefully modify and correct as we go. And then I send them off into the world to try it. And then I give them feedback as they come back and say, oh, okay, see, like, and I feel like in that structure, you have this pendulum swing where you learn a little bit, you try it, and you're like, oh crap, I don't know a lot. And you learn a little bit more, even if it's repetitive. You try it again, you're like, oh shoot, I still don't know. And you come back.
That's pretty incredible. And I'm thinking of our students particularly and the different ways that they learn, Charles, with this technique and getting them involved. How do you, because it definitely it causes the students to have to engage as opposed to coming and just listening to a lecture that's very passive and easy, I guess, right?
Mhm.
Because they just get to come and sit and listen for an hour. What do you do with those students who are a little reluctant to try? Maybe they are really not comfortable with their writing ability. How do you manage that in the classroom?
I think I feel like a couple of different ways. If I'm noticing that nobody's contributing in the larger group, I'll say, okay, like either with the folks next to you, or I'll kind of force them into new groups, so they're with new people, and you have this a little bit more obligation to try to talk to folks. I also leave the class too, because I think sometimes there's an awkwardness of me just sitting and staring at them. And so I even said, I'm like, I'm going to be gone for 5 minutes. I'm going to wander. I'm going to drink whatever's in my cup. And when I come back, I want to hear something. And so typically when I come back, like I'll wait outside the room, see if anybody's actually talking. And even then, sometimes that doesn't work. I have a class that's every student individually is extraordinarily engaged with when I touch base with them, but they struggle with engaging in the larger group. And so for folks like them, getting them out of the classroom and doing things that are engaged, even if they aren't having to speak aloud in the class, like they're going to be maybe like elbow elbow whispering to somebody that's looking at the same thing they are. They're not necessarily contributing to the whole class, but I can observe that it's happening. Like it doesn't have to look the same way in every class. And I have some classes that are, boy, they're loud's the wrong word because it's like positive. They're all very engaged and they're talking and they're making fun of each other. And it's usually like I have 3 soccer boys that are just brutal to each other, but they're so good at engaging and getting things rolling in class. So the engagement and trying to get people to do things, especially like you said with the writing, if people aren't confident with their writing, so much of the class is built around the idea that nobody's really comfortable with their writing. Folks that get published aren't comfortable with their writing. I try to bring in, this is kind of like the I do, we do, you do thing. I have an editor, and whenever I write scripts, she's like a friend of mine. We get drinks. She destroys me, and it's just brutal. It is just like a bloody document. And so I'm like, guys, like I get paid to do this, and look what she did to me. And I said, this is normal. Like this is what a writer does. And so I think part of, especially in English, getting that engagement is deconstructing the expectation of what a writer should be. Because I think there's a stereotype that like, oh, it should just flow. And if it flows, it's probably not good writing. Or they're lying to you and they spent a long time to get it on the page so it seemed like it flowed to the reader. Um, so I think building the confidence of the students is huge. And saying like, no, 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 like we're here to learn. It's okay to mess up. But that doesn't mean they're not always like they're still going to be quiet sometimes. And so just, structuring it in a way that's going to make them feel the most comfortable while still engaging. And sometimes you got to have like a come to Jesus moment. I had a class, that quiet one, where the lesson really relied on them interacting. And I was like, guys, you have to give me something. And after, I don't know if you hear a wait time, that was a very high school thing, elementary school thing, where you just sit quietly and you like wait for them to say something. You don't fill in the gaps. And I think I waited about 10 minutes of just real awkward staring at each other. And I was like, well, this is your guys' education, and this paper is really hard, and I don't know, I'm not going to fill in the gaps for you. So have a good day, and we'll try again next time. And it was one of those things where it was just, sometimes you need a little bit of a, like, you have to engage in your learning, and if you're not willing to, then I'm also not gonna I'm not gonna do the work for you, because the learning is supposed to be on your end, and me doing it isn't really helping you in any way.
What happened with that class when you said, "Hey, see you next time"? What was
About
next
6
time
of them,
like?
it was better, and after that class, about 6 of them came up, they're like, "I'm so sorry." I was like, "No, it's fine, just come back ready to talk next time." Like, that's, and I think, I don't know, I feel like this as a teacher, and I coached wrestling for a bunch of years, and I'm not mad at my class ever. I'm not like, I was thinking of my wrestlers, like, I'm never mad at them. You get your lips knocked off, I feel bad for you more than anything. And I think if I can stay kind of even keel the entire time, like, I'm not super stoked or I'm not really low. I'm not, I'm just kind of like, here we are. If you did something awesome, I'm like, wow, that's great. Good job. If you did something bad, I'm like, oh, that's a bummer. Let's try again. Um, and so they did come back, and they were a little bit better in engaging. And I tried specifically to do some different things to, um, kind of not let the giant oasis of a big silent classroom to, I guess from then, instead of having them speak aloud, I was like, I gathered all the markers I have from my office, and I lined them up on one of the whiteboards. And I said, okay, you don't have to talk, but everybody needs to go up to the board, and you're going to write whatever the thing is. And so everyone went up, wrote whatever their ideas were, or if I'm pulling quotes from a book, all right, what are the quotes? And then we go through and talk about them. And so as I'm talking about certain, um, things they wrote or quotes, I can say, "Oh, all right, you wrote this." And so I can directly say, like, "No, no, no, like, I know you wrote this. What were your thinking, or what were your thoughts?" And then I can build on that and try to make connections with them without relying on, like, the spoken word. We can just look at the what was written. But hopefully, that's something I'm working on. I'd like to get more everybody talking.
I think we all struggle with that. You have those extroverted classes, introverted classes, and sometimes it's hard to crack that nut to get them
It
to really
is.
open up. But I really appreciate how you said, you are even, you are in some ways safe. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I can mess up. I can
Yeah.
I can try, which is a big hurdle. I think a lot of our students here at LCCC, I think, never envisioned themselves here. So it's
Mhm.
nice to hear that. Um, can
And
we
I think,
have
like, in that
yeah.
mindset. Oh, sorry, I think I'm breaking
No,
up.
no, no, please
No,
go.
in that idea, like, I feel like, especially I do developmental stuff, and I think, like, you just gotta be a cheerleader and, uh, build folks up. Like, "No, no, no, like, you're here, and if people are saying you can't be here, screw them. Like, you're here, you're doing it, that's awesome, and my job is to support you to do that. Like, I'm not here to break you down, I'm here to do whatever I can to help you."
It's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, we're all here to learn, right? I mean, the whole point is to learn. You're going to
Yeah.
learn from making your mistakes. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I don't wanna, like, it's good to do poorly. I think it's good to fail at times.
I want to touch on something, and I think this comes back to what you were talking about. A lot of times I think we think, "Oh, active learning, I've got to do a game every time. I've got to do
Mhm,
these amazing, things where students walk away from my classroom and then they're just like, wow." And so that's another kind of misconception. You talked a little bit about like not thinking that it has to be a game, and really it's just
mhm.
a relationship building and things. Couple of things. Can you walk us through a little bit, like, how do you plan these out? Because I think some of our newer faculty maybe are going, "What do I do with 75 minutes? Do I have to have activities all the time? Can I lecture a little bit?" How do you go about planning your approach and your class time?
Um, this is very much because of my high school experience. Like, if you are not planned for the entire for us, it was a 90-minute class, like, they will eat you alive.
Mhm.
Like, there is no, "All right, guys, just hang out," and especially now, it's terrible. And so I really relied on chunking up my class, and,
Mm.
I know that I can dedicate, like, a 20-minute chunk to this, 20-minute chunk to that, 20-minute chunk to that. And I think of this, like, this is what I tell students when they're writing their final papers. When you use subheadings, it kind of breaks it up, and it feels like you're writing smaller papers within the larger. And so my class, I'm chunking it up to things that are, oftentimes they're I don't want to say repetitive, but they're structurally repetitive, where I'll say, okay, we had a reading. We're going to talk about the reading first, then we're going to get into this, and then we're going to get into this. And so I I hate surprises. I don't like pop quizzes. I'm not trying to test students on how quickly or how well they can react. I want to know what they know. Um, and so for me, I try to make sure that I'm very structured. And so if you were to look at my schedule, every class period has like 4 or 5 things chunked into there, and I know each of them are going to take anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 minutes. And so for me, that keeps me from like a long lecture too. I think there's only one day where it's kind of a longer lecture, but still the students are involved in giving me their ideas, and then we say like, okay, here's what you're coming to the table with, and here's what I'm asking for, and see like keep this, try to avoid this, and address misconceptions. So thinking about that learning, like the active learning, for me, it's like, what am I going to enjoy? What am I going to be engaged with? How can I think of what we're learning outside of the classroom environment? Like thinking about how my assignments can transfer, and some things they don't have to, because for me, it's just the skill that's necessary. But I like to have that connection of thinking about like, where is this going to go for me elsewhere, in a way that's authentic, right? Not, I really hate hokey stuff because it makes me feel awkward. Like in movies, if there's an awkward scene, like I'll get up and pace. I just can't handle it. So I don't want that in
No
class.
awkwardness.
No, no. As awkward as I am already, like I just, I don't want to avoid it.
I get it.
So
So Charles, what would you say for someone who's interested, a faculty member that hasn't, they're comfortable doing the lecture thing, right? So
yeah,
what would be your advice to them to try to, if they're interested in getting into doing more active learning in their classroom?
I think like if you really love to lecture, then like you like being the sage on the stage, right? You like that kind of focus. And I think sometimes um the idea that you have to let go of the reins a little bit feels real scary. And so I would say try to build stuff where you're still at the center, to start. And that's maybe like a nice easy transition where as you're lecturing, rather than just talking through all of your lecture points, say, okay, now we are going to talk about, I was going to try and be clever and use like a science term. I'm not. So like, all right, we're going to talk about body paragraphs. What do you know about body paragraphs? And then let the students fill in the gap. And so I will, a lot of times, especially at the beginning of the year, I try to address what students come to me with, especially misconceptions from high school, or just, we're taking another step in our writing. So things they learned before, we're going to push against. Um, and so I'm going to write, okay, like here's some do's and don'ts. Here's what you said. That's awesome. We're going to try to avoid that now. Or yes, that's awesome. We want to keep doing that. And so having the students fill that in, you're still kind of in charge of discussion. It's still sort of a lecture. Um, but you're forcing the students to engage, and you're trying to build into their previous knowledge and their background knowledge, and you're like forcing them to synthesize the information a little bit with your help. And I think that is something that if you want to try it, like that's a good start. I would really, this is my bias, but I would really avoid trying to be like, make a Facebook post, or we're going to make Mario Brothers educational. I think that's really hard. And I think that's a tough thing to do, especially when you're new to that engagement, because then it might just come off as hokey. And yeah, like the gaming stuff's good, but I think there's also there was a teacher I taught with for a very long time who everything was a game, and the students loved it, but they didn't know what they learned. And I think that's there's a balance there, right? Like you can have fun, but your job isn't to be like the symbol monkey. Like you're not there just to entertain. And I think when we're focused so much on engagement, like sometimes things have to be hard and they got to be a little bit
Mhm.
boring, because you need a foundation of knowledge. So if you're that lecturer, don't try to jump just into like, here we go. All right, we're doing things. Um, I would try to ease into it and realize like you're not going to throw everything out, but maybe think about how you approach that information, or how do you make sure the students are participating in that lecture.
And is there like because what you described, it feels so natural to you, but like is there like a playbook you go to and it's like, okay, here's the strategy I'm pulling for this one, or is it more just over time and your experience, you've just
I
kind of
think,
figured out what
man,
works?
over time, I had a lot of stuff bomb. And that's a bummer when you're like, I spent weeks on this brilliant thing and then it sucks.
Yep.
And so, I think one of the things I do, especially when I'm trying something new or different or weird, um, and this is just in general, I have like these giant sticky notes and I have them in my office. And every time something doesn't go well, I make sure I write down notes because I'm not going to remember at the end of the semester. So I'll write down notes and say, hey, for the next time, try this, try this, try this, or throw this out entirely. Um, and so last year I taught 810 for the first time, which is like the developmental before developmental. And I tried a lot of things that did not work. Some of them worked really well, and the students were super excited about it. And a few of them were terrible. And so, and I think for me too, being honest with the students, saying like, "Hey, I'm going to try this, and let me know what you think." And when you say that, one, you're showing like the vulnerability. I really like. Um, I try to tell a lot of stories, especially stories of me being a jackass, because it humanizes. Like I'm not on this pedestal. I'm still trying to figure stuff out. And the more that we can realize we're on a similar page, the better. And so if I can tell the students like, hey, I'm trying this, and if it doesn't work, like I'm going to make sure it doesn't hurt you. You're not going to be punished for my sucky lesson. But please tell me like what works, what doesn't work. And I remember that first semester, I had like 5 students who were with me, really, really with me in terms of every one of those things. And they'd make fun of me like, man, that was not good. So what are you going to do next time? I was like, all right, well, here's my thought. And so I think that that's nice. Just having that willingness to again, willingness to fail, willingness to struggle, but also be honest. Like, I always really hated instructors that would try something and it would go poorly and then they would blame the students. And I think I'm not a comedian, not even a little bit. But listening to comedians talk about like you can't blame the audience. If they don't react, it's not on them.
Right.
So,
I appreciate that. It really brings, again, back to your authenticity. It's like, being authentic is also recognizing when things don't work and being okay
yeah.
with that and moving on. Thank you.
And I think there's sometimes a struggle. Like if I'm as teachers, um, and I think this is a struggle, like the standardization of things. I always kind of rail against. Because I am not going to be the best teacher for everybody. Some students are not going to appreciate what I'm doing, and that's okay because we have other instructors that are different than me. Um, I remember the first year I ever taught was in Torrington, and my wife was teaching at the same time, and we had similar students. And I remember there was a student that I was having a hard time with, and so I asked my wife, I was like, "What do you do? Like, he seems all right in your class. What do you do?" And she said, "Well, I squat down next to his desk and I talk really quietly and I say, okay, we should try this and this and this." I was like, "All right, I'll give that a shot." So I went down and I squatted next to the kid and I was like, "Hey, blah, 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 blah." And then after a little bit, I stopped and I was like, "This is weird, isn't it?" He's like, "Yeah, I don't like this." He's like, "Yeah, me either." I was like, "How about you stop being a punk?" He's like, "That sounds good." I was like, "I won't do this again." And he's like, "Thanks." And so it just, my approach, I'm different than somebody else. So like my approach might not always work. And I think for me, when you think of whatever authentic looks like, it's going to be unique to instructor to instructor. Like you cannot standardize authenticity. That's silly. And I think that's where, I've done a ton of work on K-12, why things aren't working. And it's the effort to try to standardize everyone's interactions with students, because as a teacher, you can't be everything for everyone. You just can't.
Right.
It's impossible. But you can do your best for as many folks as you can. And then you got to rely on the people you work with and trust them that they're going to maybe catch the folks that, you know, maybe just didn't vibe with you.
Now I want to follow on that. I like that.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear though. That's not an excuse of, oh, I can punt and just keep lecturing at all times, right?
Yeah. I mean, you might have a couple students that like that because that means they don't have to do anything. But yeah, I think that's fair. And I think when we think about that authenticity, like, I don't know that anyone is authentically just a lecturer and survives in the world. Like, if that's all they do, like, what does their home life look like? Are they just preaching to everyone? Yeah, I don't know. And I think it's hard because lecturing can be great. It can be easy. But I think for students' sake, try something different, try something weird. And if it doesn't work for those students, maybe revise it or like, this is the wrong audience. And I think sometimes semester to semester, like I had some stuff that worked awesome in the fall, and then my spring semester, it was terrible. And so, I'm just willing to try to adjust and adapt. And I want to like point to um, Dave's monitor in the English department. He consistently he comes up and asks me questions. I'm like, Dave, why? you're asking me questions, man. Like I should be asking you questions. And like to me, he's somebody that is consistently looking for like, okay, the population's changed. How do I adjust? How do I adjust? How do I make sure I'm doing this better? How do I make sure I'm being efficient? Like I think he's been here 48 years and he's still doing that. Like that's outstanding. Like that's wild. And I got to go sit in his classroom, or not sit in. He was out, and so I took over, and his students were spectacular. And I was like,
Mm.
he's done something that is amazing that I have no idea what it is, um, but it's so good. And so I think when you have somebody that's very good at what he does, and he's been doing it for a very long time, to still be asking questions, like I don't think any of us have an excuse not to. Then,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a salient point. So, you talked about it doesn't work for everybody. There are different ways to do this. What do you see in your students? You said that Dave's students, there was something there. Why is active
yeah,
learning worth it? Why should we reinvent ourselves or try to, think differently?
I think like what I saw in Dave's students that I try for, and I feel like I saw sometimes in different years I was teaching in different spaces. Um, I think community matters a ton in a classroom. I think it is important that the students realize who's around them and that they know each other's names and that they're kind to each other. I think that's just tremendous. Um, because I think sometimes we get to a point where like school is to get your degree only. And I feel like I want to get away from this idea that like you're getting a certificate to go specifically into that job. Like we're trying to create holistic people. Like all education is we're trying to create folks that like I want to be in a community with. And I want people to be able to think critically. I want people to interact. I want people to be able to disagree and have a conversation that stays, you know, even keel as they talk. And so I think when we have that active learning, when we have engaged learning, it allows for the community to develop a little bit more. It allows for connections to be made outside of the content area, and outside of like the very literal, here's how you write a paragraph. Because for me, like the writing process is not just about creating an essay. It's about how do I draft? How do I problem solve? How do I brainstorm something? How do I deal with issues and problems? How do I deal with feedback? And to me, that's applicable to everything. But if we focus on process in the class, then I think there's ideally less focus on grades because I think that's a wonderful thing to get away from. And then the learning comes first, the community comes in there too. And then you develop this culture of we're here to learn, we're here to mess up, and we're here with a bunch of other people that we're going to stick around with. But if you can create an environment that's comfortable, that's as safe as it can be, that allows folks to experiment a little bit, I think active learning will help that because it forces the interaction, it forces the mistakes, it forces a lot of these other things that creates a culture that focuses on just or things outside of just if I get this one degree, I will be doing this one job, and that's why I'm here. Like I hate that idea. I like the idea that to me, I guess the example is like when folks say, "When am I ever going to use that?" Like thinking of math, and like, well, if you might not ever be using algebra again, but you've developed some critical thinking and problem solving, and you've adapted some or like developed some like neural connections that are making you think a little bit differently about the world, and that's what matters, not the fact that you can do this equation.
Right. There are so many things that I can think of that I've learned today from you, Charles, and I just appreciate the time.
Yeah,
Some of the things that really resonated, I think, are that you're building a classroom, you're building a community, you're building it to be enjoyable, but also in a place where there's going to be growth and learning and giving students the space to do that and encouraging that environment. And then again, just back to what I think that you talk about in your podcast, and then what you try to model is just creating an authentic space where the students
mhm,
understand that you're there for them to learn, and in that environment you're going to be the person who pushes them at times, and you're going to also be the person who's there to give them feedback, to interact with them, and to really, like you said, build citizens of our society who are ready to contribute. So
yeah,
just a wonderful learning session with you. Thank you for our listeners. This is our second podcast, and we're so excited to keep going with this active learning series. Thanks for watching, where our SPARCcast, where a single spark can ignite inspiring change.